those dents, while smaller people could climb on top of the table and use these dents as table substitutes while sitting on the tabletop. On Earth, this would probably be considered unhygienic, or at least pretty rude, but the food was not supposed to touch the table anyway. If you just left it on the trays, you would be fine. Chairs were apparently deemed too impractical to accommodate so many different forms and sizes, so they were scrapped completely. Everyone just sat either on the ground or on the tabletops. As James now neared the plain metallic table where Moore and Quies were already eating, he pondered whether he should climb on top of the table or just eat standing up, because he stood at a very awkward height between almost big but also still small. He decided on the latter and lifted his tray, filled with leaves that reminded him of giant spinach, some cooked small corn grain, the color of old book pages, a green, round fruit with wrinkly exterior and smelling mildly of maple, and a sort of a stew of the ingredients of which he had no idea about, but it did smell good. So he decided it was probably good enough, up onto a place next to Moore, where the tabletop was eaten. As he greeted everyone, Moore was eating what looked like steamed grass to him. Quies, on the other hand, was eating something that looked like eggs? Pearls, maybe? Yeah. Or maybe some nut using calcium or lime as a shell, like animals did. He did not know. Quies had not gotten any less unsettling while he was in medical, and James decided to try and not look at them too much while eating. "You are back already," signed Quies at him from across the table once he had found a favorable position to stand at it. James was not sure if that was a question or a statement, because their face was still completely unmoving. Moore was sitting next to him, still being bigger than him while sitting down. James lifted his arm above the table, showing them the handiwork of the medic up close. "I told you, I was just getting patched up," he added, before starting to shovel some of the grain into his mouth. By now, he was very hungry. Moore seemed to take a moment to actually swallow their food before addressing James. "They literally sewed it shut," they said, like someone expecting a punchline. "It's how we do it back on Earth," James answered as soon as he was able, and wanted to keep his mouth empty for long enough. "Helps the body repair itself if the wound stays closed." "Your body repairs such grievous wounds on its own?" Quies signed while loudly cracking one of the pearl-like things in their massive jaws. This? Grievous?" James laughed while pointing at the wound. "Losing an arm would be grievous. This is nothing. An adaptive immune system and a body that repairs itself on short notice," Moore summarized. "Humans appear to be quite hardy." And once again James answered, "Living on a death world will do that to you." The area around them fell quiet for a moment. Quies and Moore froze in their movements, leaving food slightly before their open mouths. Slowly, putting the bite she had wanted to take back down onto their tray, Moore turned to see James better. "You hail from a death world?" they asked carefully. James nodded with a full mouth. Then he swallowed heavily and answered, "Yes. And a real bad one too. Or so I've heard." Class 4. Class 4, Moore parroted, and seemed to want to add something. But apparently, she had no words at that moment. James lifted his hand and listed the classifications of the Earth, lifting one finger for each point he made. Extreme and unstable environmental conditions, super heavy gravity, inhospitable climate. He paused, dramatically, before lifting his fourth finger and ending with on hyper-competitive evolution. Once again, a lot of people had turned towards him. After finishing his bowl of grain, he munched down on a few of the big soft leaves before adding, "Look, don't be sorry. It really is not that bad. We were made for it after all. That does explain how you can just shrug off an attack of a Myate," Moore murmured when they had finally found their voice again. "You probably had to deal with predators just as vicious on your planet," James sighed. "That really wasn't an attack," he explained. "Just a bit of an overreaction. An actual attack would have been a problem." "That was not an attack," Quais signed nervously. "Deathworlders are scary. We are okay if you get to know us better." James laughed and started digging into the strange stew. His laughing caused Quais and Moore to flinch. "You cannot possibly be defending her actions," Moore said, concerned, from beside him. James looked over to her. "Well, I am not saying it was okay what she did," James said, choosing his words carefully now. "I'm just saying I don't think she actually wanted to hurt me. It just kind of happened. And I am not angry about it. So everyone will probably be happier if we just let it go." "She ripped a hole into your arm. How can you be so calm about this?" Moore asked, agitated. "If there weren't so many people there, who knows what she would have done?" "Great. So they were doing that again." James looked up into their big eyes, fixating them. This made them seriously uncomfortable. James could feel it. "Like I said, I'm not defending what she did. Lashing out like that could have been dangerous if it had been someone less resilient than me," he explained calmly and cold, but there was no malice in what she did. "I startled her," she lashed out. "If I had not lifted my arm, she probably would not even have hit me. That is all. Nothing more, nothing less. And she was definitely sorry about it." Moore straightened up, towering over James. "You cannot honestly believe that," they shouted, causing Quais to cover and scurry back a bit. "She is a predator. They do not care if she hurts somebody." James was unimpressed by their display. He just looked at them sadly. "Is that really what you think?" he asked calmly. Dropping their bravado, Moore slumped back down and said, strained, but quietly, "Of course I do. They kill and eat other beings. I am not foolish enough to think that there are silly things like good or evil in nature. Of course, they are not evil. But how could they ever have a conscience if killing is part of their life?" James sighed and took a deep breath, hoisting himself up onto the tabletop, taking seat opposite of Moore. They looked at that surprisedly. People lifting themselves so easily was unusual. James again chose his words carefully. "Is it only part of their life? Predators kill and eat other beings. That is true. They need to in order to survive. But that is not unique to predators," he said. Moore looked appalled. "What are you insinuating?" they asked quietly. "I do not know about your world," James explained calmly. "But back on Earth, prey animals are usually not too fond of being eaten. If they spot a predator, a lot of them will flee or hide. But just as many will fight. On Earth, A lot of the herbivores are just as vicious as the carnivores in a fight, if not more. And they also kill in order to survive, even if they don't eat their kills. But that is... Moore began, but James cut them off. Different? I do not think so. But even if it was, then you could still not fault Sheeta for her actions. They looked down at him. And why is that? They asked, uncertainty starting to taint their voice. James looked back at them and answered with a soft smile. Because her reaction was not that of a predator, but that of prey. Moore looked honestly confused about that. Explain, they demanded, but in a meek tone. I already told you, James complied. I startled her, and she lashed out, just like prey would. When she woke up, I saw the fear in her eyes. I suspect that when she woke up, she was expecting to find one of the normal crew members waking her up. I'm assuming this happens more often and she has grown used to it. But this time she woke up to find herself defenseless, in the gaze of a predator. So she defended herself, like prey does. You are saying she thought that you were hunting her? Moore summarized what they had understood of his explanation. James nodded. You said that she hails from a death world. On a death world, everyone is prey, he explained further. But you are not a predator, Moore exclaimed, not sounding very sure of themselves. Their fur shook around with each of her agitated movements. James didn't even answer. He just held their gaze for a few long moments. Moore sank into themselves. I'll give you some time to digest this, James said, and hopped off of the table, making his way out of the casino. Come, find me in my lab later. Wait, Moore stammered out, and looked after James. Where are you going? James turned around, flashing all his teeth in a wide smile, and answered, I'll go get some meat. A Job for a Deathworlder, Chapter 3, Chapter 3. A change of perspective, damn it. This time she had really messed up. Sheeta had curled herself up high up on a crate in one of the cargo holds, pressing her knees against her body with her left arm and letting her tail swing over the edge of the cargo container. She was looking at the blood on her right hand with hanging ears. This had to be a cruel joke. Didn't she have enough problems already? Did she really have to go and attack and seriously injure one of the damn scientists? She let her head sink down into her knees. What was with that weird guy anyway? When she had woken up, he had looked like a Maya to her tired eyes. And to her people, waking up to someone you didn't fall asleep next to was not a good thing. So what was his problem just startling her like that? Her hand felt sticky from the drying blood, and she still smelled the iron in the air. She wondered if the scientist was going to be all right. She didn't actually mean to hurt him, even though he did deserve it, but it was too late anyway. Soon enough, somebody would come for her to tell her that she had been stripped of her rank, and would be brought back to Dunham at the next possibility. Her ears fluttered as she heard the door to the hold open. Echoing footsteps sounded throughout the room. She recognized the footsteps. He was walking quadrupedal right now, but he did not seem in any rush. Knew that I'd find you here, Captain Newton said, while looking up at her from the ground level. Let me die in peace, Sheeta answered, muffled, speaking into her knees. You know, I can't do that. Too much paperwork, Newton replied, amused. There is going to be paperwork anyway, Sheeta whined, still not looking up. Agitated her tail, began swinging around faster. Utan made that booming, bellowing sound that was a sign of amusement for his species. You are right. There is always going to be paperwork, he pressed out between the bellows, but we don't have to increase it unnecessarily, do we? Sheeta took a deep breath and steeled her nerves before finally lifting her head and turning around, letting her legs dangle down over the edge of the container and resting her arms on her thighs, looking down on the primate. Stop stalking a corpse already, she demanded, annoyed. Utan looked a bit confused and answered, I do not know that idiom, but I am guessing you want me to tell you what is going to happen now. Sheeta made a click with her lips, signaling him to continue. Utan looked at her mischievously. Well, I believe your shift will start in just a few minutes. I came here to make sure you actually show up today, he explained, making a much quieter version of that bellowing sound. Sheeta looked up, her eyes widening. She pushed herself over the edge of the crate, effortlessly falling down the drop multiple times her height and landing, unharmed, in front of Utan with a loud thud. Utan looked amused by her display, clapping his big hands while watching her straighten herself. Never thought you would make sure to see me. To my punishment personally, she said, raising an eyebrow while looking up to Utan's face, leaving one ear hanging and perking the other one up. Punishment? Utan asked, over-exaggerated, obviously enjoying toying with the situation for a bit. What punishment? Sheeta snarled, showing her fangs to signal him to drop the act. If you want me to spell it out for you, I won't. Either tell me or don't. But stop this nonsense, she demanded, piercing him with her gaze. Utan, who had long ago stopped being intimidated by her body language, peeked his lips a bit. His dark eyes blinked slowly, and his nostrils flared as he took some deep breaths. Oh, don't be like that, he said, sounding slightly disappointed. It's not every day I get to tease you a bit. You are always trying to tease me, Sheeta rebuffed, crossing her arms and looking away, annoyed. Yes, but I don't always have leverage that makes it actually work. Utan insisted and crouched down more to her level. Usually, you would just dismiss me. Sheeta only pushed some air through her teeth as an answer. Yes, you are right, Utan continued, lifting one of his big arms into a kind of shrug and shaking his head a bit. But honestly, you don't have to worry. James dropped all charges. Her ears perked up once more. James. That must have been the scientist's name. And did he say all charges? Not. But why? Sheeta murmured quietly, more to herself than to the captain. To be honest, I don't know, Utan answered anyway, gesturing to support his claim. He didn't seem upset at all. Said something about that just being how cats are. And is he okay? Sheeta asked, looking back up to him timidly. Utan bellowed once more. Yep, he's all right, he answered. It didn't even really seem to bother him, if you believe it. Deathworlders, as you may know. He smirked at that last remark. So, I am not in trouble? Sheeta asked carefully, bracing herself for the answer. At that, Utan seemed get serious. Oh, do not believe I will forget what has happened today. Just because nothing bad has come off it does not mean I will not keep your behavior in mind should any future incidents occur, he stated. And it was clear that it was not a threat, but a promise. Then more calmly, putting on an almost fatherly tone, he also added, "And even if you get no direct punishment, and even though James has demanded no such thing, I do think that it is important that you at least sincerely apologize. And you will do so as soon as possible." Sheeta looked down to her feet and answered quietly, "Yes, Captain." Uton made a happy sound and said loudly, "Great. Then that is that," while also swinging his giant arm and hitting Sheeta heavily on her back. Sheeta flinched a bit, even though, considering his size, it really did not have much force at all, and smiled lightly. Then Uton turned around and began trotting towards the exit of the hold, while shouting back to her, "Go get yourself ready. I expect you to be more than punctual at roll call." Sheeta looked down at the assistant on her wrist. The captain had been right. It was not long until her next shift would begin. So she heeded his advice, also leaving cargo and quickly getting back to her room, almost flying through the maze of halls and corridors. Every crew member she came across quickly got out of her way, a path forming for her through the oncoming crowd. She could hear a lot of them quietly talking about her as soon as she had passed them, and the spiteful kitten within her really wanted to turn around and show them who they were insulting. But the adult ranking officer within her knew that that was really not how she should behave, especially in her current situation, even if they really did deserve it. She reached her cabin in record time and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment. Once again, she looked down at her hand. The blood of the man had dried. To her surprise, in the process of drying it, had formed flakes and clumps, caking her claws. The captain had apparently spoken the truth. This was the blood of a species designed to get hurt and shake off injuries. She shook her head to get rid of the thought, her wild hair rustling around her ears. She had to get ready. She quickly made her way to the sanitary unit and began washing the blood off of her. It was annoyingly sticky and apparently determined to stay on her hand, as if it was insisting to serve as a reminder of what she had done. But apparently, military-grade soap was stronger than weird philosophical metaphors, and managed to clean all the clotted stuff off her skin. After that was done, she quickly changed into a fresh uniform. She would have loved to completely clean herself before going to the bridge, but that was time she didn't have now, having spent it sulking instead. So, she felt quite uncomfortable when she, shortly after, stepped onto the bridge, feeling sweaty and dirty. And today she had a double shift as well. Great. At least, not that many of the crew would notice. Not many species sweated. The bridge was an enormous, round room, completely wrapping around the tip of the cylinder-shaped ship that could be entered through 6 gates, each being placed about 60 degrees of the circumference apart. Being situated at the narrowest part of the ship, gravity was slightly lower here. The room had a plain gray floor, matching walls, and no roof, so that Sheeta could follow the floor wrapping all around the room with her eyes. If she looked up, she could see the small forms of busy crew members working upside down above her. The room was dimly lit, mostly being illuminated by the sheer number of computer screens used to control the various systems and processes of the ship, lighting the dark room up like a starry night. Each screen was equipped with motion capturing cameras, used for making the computers easy to utilize for crew members of each size, and non-verbally, even though vocal species could just as easily dictate their commands. The commander's seats were located directly in front of her, forming the only gap in the mass of consoles and computers. taking up most of the room space. They were surrounded by a multitude of maneuverable screens, used to communicate and supervise with every system, if necessary. She took her place in the slowly forming line of officers getting ready for the daily roll call. She stood in between Petty Officer Rujak, who belonged to the big crustacean people of the Oznana, on her right, and Chief Petty Officer Philip, who was part of the people of Hinplod, descending from truly gigantic semi-aquatic mammals, on her left. Sheeta could feel both of them casting sideways glances at her, and it was slowly getting on her nerves. But before her already strained patience could be tested anymore, a loud voice pierced the room, announcing, "Captain present." The whole line came to attention. In the various ways their species showed respect, through body language. Sheeta stood up straight, with her hands behind her back, and lifted her chin. Rujak brought his 4 spiny legs into a symmetrical X position and crossed 2 of his 4 claws each in front of him. Philip lifted himself to his full height, and in doing so had to balance himself by hovering his massive arms awkwardly. Sheeta looked straight forward, her vision on either side blocked by the giants, so she did not see the captain approaching the line, but she knew the routine. Captain Utan approached the line from her left and made sure everyone was present and accounted for, starting with the highest ranking, and would work his way down the line until he reached the cadets at its right end. When he had reached Sheeta and loudly called out her rank and name, even though he was standing right in front of her, she proudly answered, "Present, sir." He stopped in front of her, looking her up and down for a moment before stepping further down the line and calling out to Rujak. In the meantime, Sheeta could already hear their various superiors getting ready for the captain to pass the word on to them, so they could deploy everyone's first orders for today's shift in a briefing. At ease, a voice finally rang out, and everyone relaxed. Philip let out a loud huff, as he finally could slump back down into his usually slouched position. The captain now positioned himself opposite to the center of the line. "Okay, everyone. Let us keep this mission going smoothly. Do not slack off, just because everything has been quiet for a while. As always, give it your very best today," he ordered, hoisting himself up into a bipedal stance, so he stood at his full height. "Sir." "Yes, sir." A chorus of voices answered, each and every one of them also signing their agreement. The captain perked his lips into his version of a smile. "All right then. Everyone get to work," he exclaimed, clapping his hands a single time, before falling back down into his quadrupedal stance and turning to take his position in his chair. Sheeta did not see him take his place, because the second he had turned away, the entire line of officers was already in movement, grouping around their commanders and superiors to receive their orders. It took Sheeta a moment to spot her supervisor among the horde of giants moving about. Finally, she saw a hint of purple shining through the crowd. Division Officer Nalsam was waiting impatiently for her to arrive. She stood more than twice Sheeta's height, her body mainly consisting of a sort of pillar, surrounded by 12 limbs sprouting from the middle of it that could indiscriminately be used for manipulation and locomotion. Each of their ends branched out in many freely movable and very flexible endings. She did not have a head, her 4 compound eyes instead being placed in each cardinal direction right above the root of her appendages. Her other sensory organs were internal. Sheeta also knew that her mouth was located at the bottom of her body, although it was not visible. The most noticeable thing about her appearance, however, was her deep purple exoskeleton. reflecting the light of the computer screens with a metallic sheen. Her identifier, showing off her rank as a shiny button, as well as her assistant, were tied tightly around the upper part of her body. Sheeta hurried over to her side and straightened herself up. "Reporting for duty," she announced loudly. "I can see that," the duo replied in sigh. Sheeta's eyes wandered from left to right. "Will anyone else be joining us, ma'am?" she asked, confused, as nobody appeared to be forming up around them. "No. Today you will be enjoying my undivided attention, officer," Nalsam answered, switching between what limbs she signed with almost each word. Somehow, she managed to seem condescending, even while using sign language, which honestly impressed Sheeta more than it insulted her. Was this about what happened today? Instead of starting the briefing, as would have been usual, Nalsam gestured for Sheeta to follow her and began making her way to the left of the room, her appendages skittering, coordinating at an impressive speed. Sheeta hurried behind her, past the other officers still being briefed. She followed quietly, while they walked almost half the length of the entire room, the captain's chair now being almost directly above her. Nalsam led her towards a terminal, currently being used by a very tired-looking Raxus. The bird lazily waved about his four-clawed hands, switching rhythmically between 3 different parts of the screen. From her position, Sheeta could not make out what it was showing. Finally noticing them, the blue eyes looking out of the dark feathered face fell onto the dew. Replacements arrived. "You are dismissed," Nalsam signed, causing the Raxus to let out a small relieved chirp and take up a respectful position before making room in front of the terminal and taking his exit towards the nearest gate. When he walked past Sheeta, their eyes locked for a moment, and they gave a small nod to each other. Then Sheeta took over the place in front of the terminal. Looking over to her supervisor curiously, Nalsam began to sigh. "Today you will be supervising the gravitational spin. I will show you how it is done." Sheeta looked at the screen in front of her. She could see the different readings about the ship's current course, its center of mass, its gravitational axis, and its angular and tangential velocity. The ship's computer was at all time processing incoming data about each factor necessary to keep the artificial gravity on the ship consistent. It was one of the most important systems of the ship, critical for the lives of more than half the crew, including Division Officer Nalsam, whose exoskeleton would be crushed under any accelerations exceeding